several dozen decades, and she's worked all over the world. I asked her how many countries she's worked in as a lawyer, working for the lots of different organizations, the American Bar Association and stuff. She's worked in Russia, Algeria, I'm going to forget beyond that, Hungary, where else? Cambodia. That must have been an exciting assignment. And her specialty is human rights and basically gender-based violence. But she's also an expert on prisons. And nothing is more revealing, as I said in my email, about Arizona than the Arizona prison system. So we're really, really pleased to have Dianne Post here. She's just done great work, and she's done it all over the world, including some scary sounding places. Come on up. And I'm told you got to sort of stand where I am, or or Chuck can't get you on YouTube. So we're YouTube friendly. She's got the lavalier. All right, thank you.
Okay, has anybody heard of the Arizona Justice Alliance? Hey, great, all right. We are a statewide coalition working on the issues of criminal justice in Arizona, looking at efficiency, i.e. spending our money effectively, at public safety, and also at human rights. So we're going to be sending around a sign-up sheet. We hope that you'll sign up. Give me your email so I can read it, and your zip code, because we'll have some bills starting in the legislature next year, and we'll need to know how to get in touch with you, and I've got a lot of handouts over here. I'm going to be going kind of rapidly, but all the slides will be available on your website, so you don't need to take down any of this information. I'm fine if you have questions. Okay, there we go.
You just go ahead.
What?
Never mind.
Okay, this is Arizona, obviously, and you can see our prisons are focused down, Pinal County, down around Eloy, Florence, etc. But we have 13, plus we have 6 that we're not counting from CCA, plus we have the private for-profit prisons. These are the main private for-profit prison companies, well, they're the only ones left, actually. CCA, Correctional Corporation of America, on whose board sits Dennis DeConcini, and Thurgood Marshall Jr. Thurgood Marshall would be turning over in his grave if he knew that. GEO is another one in Arizona. That's the old Wackenhut. They were so disgraced as Wackenhut that they changed their name, hoping we wouldn't notice, but we did. And MTC, Management and Training Corp., they're the ones that own the prison in Kingman, where those guys escaped, remember, and murdered the couple in New Mexico. That's them. And they were the first in Arizona. They have the prison in Marana. The other 2 companies are very small, and they're probably going to be eaten up by these ones. Now this is Marana, just if you haven't seen a prison or been inside of a prison, just to get an idea what it might look like. This is the Kingman one, and that's the door to the Kingman one where none of you really want to go. These are our prisons. GEO's got these 3, and MTC's got those 2. Now the 6 CCA prisons are right now all leased to the federal government for what? Immigrant detention, right, immigrant detention. They're all down in the Eloy area, but we have no say-so over any of those prisons because they're all leased to the federal government, and now soon one will be ours. Aren't we happy about that? Now, did I miss? No, I didn't. All right, the state of the nation is, just briefly, 5% of the world's population, 25% of the prison population. Remember when we used to talk about the Russian gulag? Yeah. That's us now. That's us. We used to talk about how horrible they've imprisoned everybody in China. That's us. We've been doing mass incarceration now for 30 years, and this is the result. And of course, it's not distributed evenly. 1 in 18 men, 1 in 18 men. There's 50 people in here. How many of us is that's been arrested, of the men, right? But it's distributed unequally. 1 in 60 whites, 1 in 27 Latinos, and 1 in 11 blacks. And you notice I'm legal redress for the NAACP. Now look at this. 1 in 4 Americans has a felony record. 1 in 4 Americans has a felony record. This is just mind-boggling, is it not? And if you look at the other one, the African Americans and Hispanics, they're 58% of all inmates, 25% of the population. So more than double their percentage in the population in the prisons. Now just to give you some idea of where these changes, this increase in incarceration is coming from, you see we have the, well they're all up, but the huge increase here is federal private prisons. And who is that? Immigrant detainees. Half of the immigrant detainees go to private prisons. Half of them. Most of the money that these private prisons make is coming from immigrant detainees, especially CCA, and then state private. This is also the detainees, and they're all up, but look at these huge increases. ICE, who is who? Right, federal immigration, and the U.S. Marshals, and I'm going to tell you about a contract we just signed with the U.S. Marshals. They're the ones that arrest them, of course, up 332%. Yeah, private prisons are almost all new prisons that have been built since 2005. I told you half. Look at the money they're getting. Look at the money. Talking about senior executives, at one of the hearings they had in Litchfield Park, trying to put another prison out there, which failed, George Zoley, who is the executive director of GEO, stood up on a platform like this and opened his arms wide and said, "I will be accountable to you, people of Litchfield Park." So when we got up to ask questions, we said, "How much did you make last year, George Zoley?" And he said, "I don't have to answer that." And we said, "Excuse me, if you're accountable to us and we're the taxpayers paying your salary, we need to know how much you made last year." "I don't have to answer that." So then we asked Chuck Ryan, who is the director of Department of Corrections, "How much did you make last year?" And he had to tell us because we already knew anyway. But then we told George, $168,000. So then we told George Zoley, "Excuse me, we know what you made anyway. $17 million. $17 million. This is the kind, and they pay their guards as little as $10 an hour. All right? So then he said he's going to be accountable, so we asked him, "What's your recidivism rate? How do you know if a prison is succeeding if you don't know what the recidivism rate is, right?" And he said, "I don't know. I don't have to tell you that." And he also did say, actually he did say, "I don't know," because we don't keep those figures. Well, that's very convenient, isn't it? Don't keep the figures, so then you don't have to report that how unsuccessful you are. Now, these contracts, 65% of the contracts are up to, you promised to fill so many beds. 4 states in the union promise 100% occupancy, and one of them is? Arizona. Now prior to that, we had 90% occupancy that we promised, and of course if it's empty, then we pay even for an empty bed. And then a year ago actually in October, October, we renewed the contracts, or revised the contracts, and we then promised them 100% occupancy. Now what attorney from the Attorney General's office would negotiate a contract promising 100% occupancy? Is there 100% occupancy anywhere? In a hospital, in a nursing home, in a school? Never. Never. So why did they promise that? Well, not only did they promise it, they made it retroactive.
Oh my God.
Your state attorney generals negotiated this deal, and we are only one of 4 that have 100%. Now what happens if it's not filled? You have an incentive. Well, number one, you have an incentive to keep it filled by arresting people, don't you? And secondly, you have an incentive, if it's not full, you send your prisoners from your state prisons to your for-profit prisons, don't you? Because you got to pay for it anyway. All right. Now, this is the state of Arizona. Now, we always say, thank God for Mississippi, right? Because then we're not at the bottom of everything. The worst education, the worst health care, the worst transportation system, everything. Well, we are at the top of something. We have the, well, we're not quite yet. Oh, let me just go here. Here, we're at the top. We're the top spender on prisons per capita in the United States. Yay! Yay! We're on the top of something, right? We're the top incarceration rate in the West. You bet, we're the top one in the West. We have the 4th highest percent of our budget spent on corrections. Nationally, the average is 7 and ours is 11. And I'm going to show you the impact this has had on our education system. Yep, And of course, the arrest rates come from South Mountain. Who lives around there? Blacks and brown people, right? Except for all white Tukey. Other than that, all white Tukey, we like to call it. Other than that, it's blacks and browns that live down there. And we are not crowded. This is the argument that they make. We need another prison because we're crowded. That is a lie. And Chad Campbell called out Chuck Ryan at a meeting last December on that. And he said, you have 43,000 beds and 39,000 prisoners. You are not overcrowded. Well, Chuck's answer was, well, you can't mix them. You can't mix medium, maximum, and minimum, and you can't mix men and women. So that's the problem, right? And Chad said, you have 699 beds vacant in the women's prison. Get creative. Build a wall. Put up a fence. Do something. Move the women someplace else. But get creative and use what we've got rather than wasting our money. When you build a prison, how long are you committed to that prison for? Forever. No, not forever. No building lasts forever. No building. Well, the pyramids maybe, I don't know. 50 years. So then we're committed to wasting state money, state taxpayer money for 50 years. All right, and the increase in our population, or increase in our prisons, is not from our population increase because our population doubled, our prison rate, our prison number of prisoners increased 10 times that. 10 times that. So it's not from population. Now, we're also not getting a good deal for our money. Our recidivism rate is higher than the national average. So if you were getting a good deal and your prisons were doing good, the point would be that they don't come back to prison, right? Well, that's not happening. Of course, you can see it's up. And look at Maricopa County Jail. In spite of the green baloney, in spite of the pink underwear, we have 14-point higher recidivism rate. He's costing us a fortune. A fortune. And nonviolent offenders make up a third to a half. And most of those, of course, are drug users. Not particularly even drug sellers, but drug users. And 75% of the inmates, and DOC admits this, and I think on their latest stats they've got 89%, have significant drug abuse problems and 6% get treatment. Wow. 6%! What's going to happen when they go back out? They got the same problem they came in with. So how does this help anything, right? Now this is a contract I want to tell you about. Just the 13th of September, we just signed a contract with the U.S. Marshals with CCA for them to arrest the immigrants and put them in CCA. And we guaranteed 100% occupancy. We tried to stop this kind, we being the AFSC, the Quakers in Tucson, the ACLU and the NAACP, we were working together on a lot of this stuff, along with the Arizona Justice Alliance. We tried to stop it, we didn't manage, and look how long they made that contract for. 20 years. The usual contract is 10, but no, we want to lock in, we want to help CCA. So we locked it in for 20 years. All right, now, Steve asked me to talk about this report, which was done by the Quakers, a statewide report on the performance of these private prisons. Now, these are the various key findings. Obviously, we don't need the prison beds, we're wasting money. The security problems were enormous. Remember the escape from Cayman? Yeah. After that happened, DOC sensibly went there and did a safety audit. They found 157 safety violations. Now, one of the ways that the private prisons say we save money is we have, of course, less staff. Any business people out there know the only way you're going to save money is to have less staff, right? You know, cutting back on your coffee budget doesn't really do it. You really got to get rid of staff. So they say we have fewer staff because we have high-tech stuff. That means we don't have to have so many guards. So they have an enormous high-tech fence around the outside of that prison in Kingman. In fact, it is so high-tech that when a rabbit hops by, this is rural Kingman, right? When a rabbit hops by, it goes off. So what did the guards do? Turned it off. There's also some kind of high-tech door. Now, I'm really not clear what this high-tech door is all about, but some kind of high-tech door, you know, between sections of the prison. And when they went to do their safety audit, the door was propped open with a rock. Which is Stone Age technology, if I'm correct. So, sensibly, Department of Corrections said, you have violated the contract by not adhering to the safety regulations that you agreed to in the contract. we are not going to send you any more prisoners until you fix this. So what did the MTC do? They sued us. They sued us for not sending and keeping up to that, at that time, 90% rate. So they went to court. Who won? They did. I don't know how. I haven't seen the case. I don't know how they won, since they totally had violated the contract. So we should be able to violate it too, right? If it's void for them, it's void for us. So they won, and we taxpayers paid them $3 million. Okay. So what else she found? They do not measure recidivism rates. Mentioned that. Well, we know about lobbying and buying influence, and they are not accountable to our taxpayers. I'm going to show you something really funny about that in a little bit. So these you have to laugh, or you try. So these are the recommendations. Obviously, we don't need any new prisons. We should end our contracts with the old ones. We should investigate ALEC. Everybody knows who ALEC is? Yes. Yeah. Have an independent review body, oversight, recidivism rates, and sensible reforms. Now, some of the main findings are their turnover rate is enormous. The turnover rate of staff in the private prisons is enormous because they're young, they're badly paid, they're badly trained, it's a horrible job. They also have been fined by the Department of Corrections for not filling their vacancies. So several times they've been fined for not having filled their vacancies. And also, it says every prison was performing below the state prison rates. Oh yeah, this is another good one. 4 of the 6 prisons had a higher level of inmate disciplinary reports. What does that mean? What does that mean for your profit? If you have higher disciplinary reports, what happens to the inmates? They stay longer. If they stay longer, who makes more money? The prisons do. And who pays the money? We do. You do. Well, me too. Okay. And look at this one. The Kingman prison where they escaped, 80% of the staff prior to those escapes were new or newly promoted. Now, prior to that escape, there had been a riot at that prison where 300 whites attacked 50 blacks. And I got involved with lawsuits against them for that. And this is testimony from several of the blacks not having talked to each other. And they all said the guards went in the room, locked the door, locked them outside, and said, "You're on your own." No way were they going to mess with those 300 white inmates. And this is a horrible thing to say, I suppose, but so the melee ensued, okay, until the SWAT team came. Melee ensued, and afterwards, 21 people went to the hospital. 18 whites and 3 blacks. So there were only 50 of them, but whatever they were doing, they were fighting really hard. All right, now this is the other thing. We don't need a prison. Look at this. We had 65 more prisoners in 2010. In 2011, we had 296 fewer prisoners. And in 2012, we had 7 more prisoners. Why do we need another prison? We don't have prisoners to put in it. But you know what? If we have a prison, we'll find them. If you build it, they will come, right? Right. Okay. Arizona is one of only 3 states in the Union whose prison population did not decline. And we are the only state in the Union that wants to build a supermax. Most states are closing their supermax because they realize how inefficient and ineffective they are. They've been found to be torture.
What is supermax?
That's the very strict prison where you're in the cell 23 hours a day. You have no contact with other people. Everything is just shoved through your little window there. Even when you get out for your 1 hour a day, you're alone. No one else is with you. My sister and my nephew, her son, worked at a supermax in Wisconsin, and they both quit because they were going crazy working there. Let alone the prisoners who actually were there. Now look at these prices. Arizona's own Auditor General said private prison beds are $121 more per year. Arizona's own Auditor General. So we know they cost more. And what is the whole reason for having privatization anyway? To save money. And it's not. It is absolutely not. Medium security beds, that's 2,834 more. And those are the 1,000 beds that she wants to give CCA, new beds in Eloy. They're more costly, and these are the losses that we've had over the several years. Now, I talked about there's a consistent finding of security flaws, assaults, riots, escapes. Complaints of sexual abuse, half of them from the Eloy Detention Center. Half of them in the country from the Eloy Detention Center, right? Now, you remember the Hawaii flap, where the Hawaii used to send their prisoners to the Arizona prisons, the CCA prisons, and this happened. They were beaten not only by the prisoners, but by the guards. And Hawaii took their prisoners back because they said it was such an inhumane place to leave. And this is a quote from the governor of Hawaii. "It costs money, it costs lives, it costs communities, it destroys families, it is dysfunctional all the way around. Socially, economically, politically, and morally." And this is the governor of Hawaii, speaking about the prisons in Arizona. Staffing, I mentioned, they often don't have adequate staffing, high turnover rates, they were fined. EEOC has sued GEO for sexual harassment. You can see the rate. What else happens is when they take the correctional officer tests, those in the private prison consistently have lower scores than those in the public prisons. Look at this turnover rate in Arizona West. 61% turnover rate. Now, anybody who's tried to run a business, how do you run a business with a 61% turnover rate? Especially in something as important as guarding prisoners. And you can compare that to, the Arizona rate, 25%, but 36%, 16%, 12% in Graham County. So huge difference between them and us. Them being private prisons and us being state prisons. They don't take the seriously medically ill or the old prisoners because they cost so much more to keep, so they're not going to spend any of their money on that. You know that the ACLU has sued Arizona state prisons as well? Did you know that? It's called, I forgot actually, something versus Ryan. Parsons. Parsons versus Ryan. If you want to go online and look at that lawsuit, the initial complaint, you will be shocked. It's like reading about a 14th century torture chamber. The horrible things that go on. And this is our state prison, which are not any good either. One guy, for example, started to grow a tumor, and they refused to give him medical care until his tumor was the size of a baby. There's pictures of him. He's huge. He looks like he's going to have a baby. And of course, then they finally took him in, and of course he had cancer, and of course he died in a couple of days. Another guy that's involved in the lawsuit, he went in to have his tonsils out, and when they took his tonsils out, the doctor said, "Have you finished your chemo?" And the guy said, "Do I have cancer?" He didn't even know. He didn't even know. They knew, this new doctor knew, and the previous doctor knew. They didn't even tell him. He died 2 months afterwards. So this is the kind of treatment that they get. Really, it's like a 14th century torture chamber if you read this. All right, the other thing is programs. One of the other reasons that the private prison said we can do better is we're not encumbered by state rules, that's for sure. And therefore, we can be more innovative and we can have better programs and better educational things. Not so, because what's the bottom line for a for-profit prison? Money. Money. And the Supreme Court actually held that corporations do not have any responsibility to their taxpayers to their shareholders other than making money. They have no responsibility to the community, to the environment, to anything. That their only responsibility, legal responsibility, is to their shareholders to make money. All right, we've talked about that. Now we know that work programs and education reduce recidivism, right? We know that that happens. Well, this is what's happening in our prisons right now. Remember, we've got 39,000 people in there. 1,163 by September had finished the 8th grade training. 332 were in a GED program. 881, that stands for technical education, something.
Career tech.
Career something, technical education. And enrolled in September were 6,000 prisoners out of 39,000. Now this is at MTC. MTC, 50% of their inmate population has no job and no work and no school and nothing to do. What is about the worst thing you can do is put a bunch of guys sitting around with nothing to do all day long, right? Of course they're going to have riots. Of course they're going to have violence. They got nothing else to do. But when they did the review, they found there's all kinds of available things there in their academic center, in their DUI program, in their academic programs, in their a DUI program, but there's nobody filling them. They're available, but they're not putting them in there. This is another one. They found in general, private facilities are less likely to offer educational program because it costs money. They are less likely to offer a jobs program because it costs money. But what they do, and this is why the AFL-CIO recently filed a resolution against private for-profit prisons. In Kingman, very same Kingman, they fired 6 city employees, union employees, and replaced them with prisoners to do all the maintenance in Kingman. That they will do. That they will do. Now, transparency and accountability. Zippo. Zippo. They are not responsible for public records requests nor for FOIAs. So we cannot get information from them. In the contracts with the DOC, it says that the information at the private prison that they're contracted with belongs to DOC, but when you ask DOC, they say, we don't have it, get it from them, and when you ask them, they say, we're a private corporation, we don't have to give it to you. So you can't get it. I told you about that. Bureaucracy. This is not counted in the cost when I said how much more it costs. In order to monitor these prisons, the state has to set up a whole separate bureaucracy, right? That is not counted in the cost, so it actually costs more. Now, you mentioned Thursday night when I spoke at the Republican meeting, and they said, well, yeah, but you're not counting in the pensions either, which is true. The pensions are also not counted in, which would be more money on the state side, but this is also then less money on the state side because they haven't counted in the cost of the bureaucracy either. So, follow the money. Where does it come from? Lobbying, right? Tremendous amount of money is being spent on lobbying. CCA was the biggest spender, and look who it went to. Brewer, Pierce, Adams, Tobin, right? And CCA was the chair of ALEC's Public Safety Committee. They were members of ALEC for 20 years. They have not been a member of ALEC for 10 years, which when I confronted DeConcini, he got very upset. And he yelled at me and he said, we haven't been a member of ALEC for 10 years. I said, but you're on the Public Safety Committee even though you're not a member, which is true. GEO, they've got all these lobbyists, they've hired all these firms, people that worked at Moffitt's, people that worked at the Department of Corrections. You know the revolving door, right? You go from the government to the private sector making a ton of money. Also GEO with their political action committees and the amount of money that they spent. Now this is an interesting one, MTC. Anybody remember Terry Stewart? He used to be the director of the Department of Corrections. For many years he was the director. When he quit, he went immediately to work for private prisons. Then he formed his own, and who worked for him? Chuck Ryan. Who, when Stewart was the director of DOC, Chuck Ryan was his second in command. Chuck Ryan is now the director, right? So when Stewart had left DOC and went to a private corporation, Stewart followed right behind him. Stewart then opened his own business. Chuck went right with him. Chuck then left and went back to the government, obviously. And at one point, the U.S. contacted Stewart to run the prisons in Iraq, including Abu Ghraib. He was investigated regarding Abu Ghraib and the horrors that took place there. He was not indicted. He was not found to be at fault for that, but he was involved in it. So this is the conclusion from the study, is that either they are so wedded to it that they can't get over it, or they're getting paid, which I think it's the latter, and we need more control over private prisons, not less. What's happening nationwide is that the number of prisoners is going down, prisons going down, crime rate is going down, nationwide. And many of the states have closed their prisons and have changed their sentencing policies so that fewer people are going to prison and they're getting out quicker, because we've also lengthened the sentence. This is what Arizona Justice Alliance is working towards, some of these things. The leading states, now you can see the changes they've made in their law, relaxing mandatory minimums, the death penalty, post-conviction relief, parole and probation, and all sorts of things that they're changing in their policies. And you can see the states. Look at the states. These are not all blue states, are they? And here's some of the other ones, North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi. In all of these states, when they closed their prisons or changed their sentencing policy, what happened to the crime rate? It went down. Now this is counterintuitive to the opposition who will argue we have to keep these people in prison because the crime rate will go up. That is absolutely false. There was some statistician who, I don't understand it, but did some analysis that for all the people that we locked up and then to stop crime and it never happening again, we should have zero crime in the United States, which obviously is not true. And there's all kinds of both factual data right now and studies that show longer sentences are counterproductive for reducing crime. What reduces crime is not the severity of the punishment, but the certainty. The certainty is what is the deterrent, not the severity. And the severity actually causes more crime. Arizona is the only state with truth in sentencing for first-time drug abusers. Meaning, once you're convicted of first-time drug abuse, a little bit of marijuana, you're going to spend 85% of your time in prison. We're the only state in the union. The leader in closing prisons and changing policy, believe it or not, is Texas. Texas and Florida. They're the two leaders. We're going to try to bring Texas Republicans here to try to educate our Republicans here about how they can do this. They had a 9% drop in incarceration and a 10% drop in crime. Their crime rate is now as low as it was in 1973. And they've used that money to put into programs. They have no waiting list for drug treatment now. This is where we need to be going. These are some other states that did it: New York, New Jersey, Kansas, Michigan. Now, Arizona had a really great idea in 2008. We passed this Safe Communities Act. And what it said was, for the counties, if you send fewer people to the state prison, we will save money and we will give you half of it back. Good idea, right? It worked. Look what happened. Felonies down, revocations down, revocations down, revocations down, non-custody down. Everything, I mean, it was a fabulous test. So what happened? They never paid them any money. They never paid them that money. The state never paid the counties that money. What happened in 2008? The recession. The recession. So they said, we don't have the money, didn't pay it. Next year they revoked the law. Now here's a little cost comparison. Notice it costs more in the Maricopa County jail than the prison. This is the jail we're supposed to be saving money by green bologna and pink shorts in Tent City. Right. It actually costs more in the jail than the prison. So these are some comparisons. If you put people in drug treatment, you'd save $20,000 a year, right? And remember, 75 or 89 or whatever percent it is have drug problems when they go in, don't they? Treatment works. We know that for every buck spent, we return 18 bucks. There's another study in Wisconsin, even on psychopaths, which they thought could never be rehabilitated. Even that saves money. Now here's, well, I'm almost to the reason why. All right, impact on families, of course, is horrible. 1 in 30 kids has a parent in jail today. 1 in 30. How many kids in the classroom? 30. Approximately 30, right? So in every classroom in this country, some kid has got a parent in jail. Which is, again, almost as unbelievable as that 1 in 4 Americans has a felony record. But it's true. This is another thing. There are 3 times more black people incarcerated today than in South Africa during the height of apartheid. And what did we do about South Africa? We divested, didn't we, to try to crash that government. We have a divestment campaign going on right now against private for-profit prisons. It's with Color of Change, and it's called the divestment campaign to get people to take their money out of the stock. Who's the biggest stockholder in private for-profit prisons? Wells Fargo. There are more black men under correctional supervision in the U.S. today than were slaves in 1850. Than were slaves in 1850. So when black people tell you slavery never ended, it didn't.
Great, I have to go. Great.
All right, public safety. We already mentioned that. Now, here's the research. The Pew Research says any incarceration over 500,000 people, 500 people per 100,000, causes more harm to the community than it solves. Because of the disruption of the community, the disruption of the family, going on welfare, inability to work. And when you get out of prison, can't get a job, you can't rent a place, you can't get services, you can't get a loan to go to school, you can't do anything. What are you supposed to do? What's left for you to do? Crime, exactly. And today in the United States, in general, 750 per 100,000 are being arrested. We are causing more crime than we are stopping. And look at the rate for blacks. 2,200 per 100,000. More than 4 times the maximum amount. So when we complain about black communities being disrupted, we disrupted them. And we have since slavery. Low-risk, nonviolent people are going to prison. We know a lot of drug offenders, because of the war on drugs, are going to prison. They're serving more time. 21 months has gone up to 28 months. And just that amount is costing us $25 billion a year. Just those 8 months. What's it doing to education? They compete for the same money. Here is where education used to be. 19.1% of our budget. Now it's 8%. Corrections used to be 4%, and now it's 11%. We are spending more on corrections than we are on education. This is spending more on the back end than on the front end. If we poured that money into preschool education, we wouldn't have to spend it at the end, would we? What is the basis for determining prison beds in 20 years? Anybody know? Yep.
Third grade.
Third grade reading level. Who can't read at a third grade reading level, it's assumed they will be in prison in 20 years. What is the best program for ensuring that children will be able to read a third grade reading level? Head Start. And what did we do to it? Cut it so we could put the money into prisons. This is the amount that the money went up and down for per capita for education and then for prisons. And what makes me so mad is they cut the funding to community colleges 50%. Who goes there? Poor people, black and brown people. There's our education funding. Now this is Konopnicki, who was a Republican, and he was against it as well. In 2002, we invested 40% more in universities. 10 years later, it was reversed. So if they can do that in 10 years, we can turn it around back in 10 years. These are some more states that have succeeded: Kansas, Mississippi, South Carolina, Kentucky, Ohio. Now, private prisons are less safe. They have more violence, poorer trained people, all of that sort of thing. And what you don't know is that you are paying for their health insurance. Do you remember that we have a law that says when a first responder is killed in the line of duty, we, the state, will pay the health insurance for the family of that first responder for a year. That was changed last session, at the very end of the session, when so many things happened, to forever. We'll pay it forever. Until the spouse remarries or the children age out. At the last minute, Kavanaugh put in an amendment to include private for-profit prisons. So they are likely to have more violence and more deaths of guards, and we are going to pay the health insurance for the for-profit companies' employees. Recidivism. There was a couple of studies early on that showed that private for-profit prisons had better recidivism rates, or the same, than state ones. However, they have done later studies more recently, and they think these are better studies because they were broader, and now they find that private prisons have less, or a worse recidivism rate than public prisons. Wages. Here's the wage scale from the federal to the state to the local government and to private prisons. They're paid the least, and that low pay drives down the pay for everybody else, right? Which is also why the unions have gotten involved in this. It does not bring jobs or economic development, even though that's often the argument for rural areas to put in a prison. But it's not true. If you look at Eloy, they're below national and even Arizona averages, for God's sakes. And that's not saying much, is it? 10% of the population is in the facilities. Their wages are 26% less than the Arizona average. So how do they bring economic development? Drive down the main street of Florence and tell me what economic development is there. It's simply not true, and there's all kind of research for that. All kind of lobbying, tons of money spent by CCA to lobby, and they lobbied for no bail for detainees. They're the ones that lobbied in the law in 1996, and who was president then? Clinton, that the immigrant detainees would have no bail. So if they have no bail, that means you must keep them in this for-profit prison, right? ALEC lobbied for that. CCA lobbied for that. and so they charge $5 a minute for phone calls. And then you're supposed to keep in touch with your family. How? So follow the money. This is the good thing. They don't pay any taxes. This year, the CCA and GEO got letters from the IRS that they are real estate investment trusts, meaning that all they do is manage real estate. And they return 90% of their profit to their shareholders. That makes them this trust, and they don't have to pay taxes. Yeah. GEO estimated was saving $50 million a year in taxes. So corporations are people, and people are property, right? That's where we are today. Now, who knew about this was going on? Did you know? No. The legislators knew. We actually have a law here that says you cannot give a contract to a for-profit unless they can show 1, cost savings, and 2, at the same or better quality level of service. We've had that law for a long time. They didn't use it. In 2003, they said, well, notwithstanding this law, we're going to give this contract. 2007, notwithstanding this law, we're going to give this contract. So in 2011, they're going to give another contract. So Arizona, the Quakers, sued them under this and said, you cannot let any of the 3 bidders bid, GEO, CCA, or MTC, because we have figures for the last 6 years at that time of their costs, and their costs more, not less. So according to this law, you can't do it. So we sued, and what happened? We lost. Well, first we lost, and they said, you're not interested parties, you don't have standing. We're the taxpayers, and we have taxpayers standing in Arizona, but they said you don't have standing and you can't bring the case. So then the next year, they changed the law, so that we wouldn't be able to sue them under that. So then, ADOC knew they're going to buy back Marana in 2015. You know, we normally run, they own the thing for 20 years, then we buy it back. So we're buying back Marana in 2015, and what did they do? They gave a sole source contract to to MTC to run it. So what's the difference? Now, Ryan says we're going to save $850,000 a year in savings. Well, we've been telling him that. Yeah, you'll save money if you own the prison. So we will save money, but now they've given a sole source contract to to MTC. So this is one of your to-do things. Contact Brewer and copy Chuck Ryan. Do not give a sole source contract to MTC. We require other bidders, and it's a violation of that law. We're still going to try to stop this. It hasn't actually happened yet. The players knew. Now look at Brewer. Her sentiment, her previous chief of staff, he and his wife are both lobbyists for CCA. Both of them. And her campaign manager was an advisor and lobbyist for CCA. Do we wonder why she signed a contract for CCA in August of 2013? No, we have no question why she did that. So all kind of money spent on lobbying, more money spent on lobbying. Now, CCA has got a ton of abuses. They've been sued all over the country, but all 3 of these prisons have terrible records. And I just want to show you this one particular one. This one. These are juvenile institutions. It was called, is in Colorado, I believe. It was, Idaho. It was called a gladiator school because what they did to determine how to run the yard was they let the teenage boys fight it out. And whoever won, that's who got to run the yard. This is CCA management. This is how they run their prisons. They've been thrown out of these 3 states in 2013 because of their horrible, horrible management practices. So they've been kicked out of Colorado, Ohio. They've been called liars. All kinds of other names that I couldn't say since it's being taped. GEO was also kicked out of Mississippi. This was also a juvenile institution that they ran, and the judge called it a cesspool of unconstitutional and inhumane acts. It was so horribly run, and this is GEO. They've been sued and lost sexual harassment cases. Yeah, so what are the solutions to this problem? Because we filed the challenge, we lost. After the next year, then but we lost, but we won. Because we held them up long enough that the legislature then did not approve the appropriation for the 5,000 beds. So we lost the case, but we won. So then the next year, they put out a challenge for 2,000 beds, and we couldn't sue them in the court anymore because we lost the year before, and they got rid of the thing. So we sued them through the procurement process. We went through all 3 levels, and what happened? We lost. However, we won sort of a little bit, because there they said we were not interested parties. The only interested parties were the ones who bid on the contract. So we said, next contract, the Quakers and the NAACP are going to put in a bid. Now, if you had to go to prison, wouldn't you want to go to prison run by the Quakers and the NAACP? I would, if I had to go. But again, we lost, but we won because we got the legislature then only appropriated money for 1,000 beds instead of 2,000 beds. 500 of those beds are supposed to come online in January. We're still trying to stop it. That's another thing I'm asking you to do. Write to Brewer and tell her, don't open those beds. We don't need them. We don't want them. And then remember we got that $95 million on the foreclosure settlement? For the scams, the bank scams, the people in the foreclosure scam. And Brewer said she was taking $50 million of that money to build a supermax prison. So her thinking is this. You've lost your money in the foreclosure scam. Now you're your house. Now you're homeless. You're living under the bridge. You lose your job. You lose your car. You go to Circle K. You steal a loaf of bread. We got a home for you. Right? It's called prison. What else could she be thinking? So she was sued. Guess what? We lost. So now Horn has transferred that money to the general budget. So we went to some state agencies. When they issued the contract to the designer for the Supermax prison, I sued. I knew I wasn't going to win, but we're just trying to hold them up long enough that we can get the political will going so it won't happen. Of course, I lost. Then I also filed a complaint against DeConcini because he's not only on CCA board, he's on the Board of Education. And where does the money come that goes to the private for-profit prisons? Right out of our education budget. So how can he sit on the Board of Education and say, I'm trying to get a better education system for Arizona, and then sit on the Board of CCA and say, well, I'm making money out of for-profit prisons, which taking the money out of education in Arizona. He was not happy about that. But, all right, so we've tried the legislature. Chad has introduced a gazillion bills, as has Cecil Ash, a Republican, before he didn't run anymore. These are just some bills. None of them went anywhere. They weren't even heard. Weren't even heard. Capital review, whenever you're going to build a building, you have to have a capital review. We went down in this December of 2012. Gazillions of people spoke against it, so what happened? They passed it. So then we went down in June of 2013. They wouldn't let us speak. This is what's called moxie. They wouldn't let us speak at all. Fortunately, I had written my comments ahead of time and passed them out to all of the members in their offices before it happened, so at least they got it. So what are the solutions? As always, you. It's the people. In Globe, they tried to put a prison in Globe, and 1,000 people showed up at the city council hearing to stop it. 1,000 people in Globe. So what did the city council do?
Passed it.
They passed it. 4-1. So then the people got an initiative, and they ran an initiative to say you can't put a prison in here until you have passed it on an initiative through the people. So the city council then sued the people and said this initiative was not valid. And the court said, you won. You won. The initiative's not valid. But by this time, again, they lost, but they won. Because by this time, the private prison said, oh, to heck with these people. We know we're going to be fighting these people. They're going to be a pain in our behinds the whole time we're here, so let's just go somewhere else. So they lost, but they won because the prison left. And what happened at the next city council election?
They were reelected.
No, they weren't. 4 people were chucked out. All 4 that voted for that prison went out. So if they can do it there, you can do it here. Anybody can do it. I mentioned the Methodist Church divested $1 million from their portfolio in CCA because they said, as a church, it is immoral to make money off of imprisoning other people. And to me, that's the bottom line here. It is immoral, and we should not be doing it. So lots of resolution, church groups, divestment campaign. Oh, I want to just run quickly through this voter survey. The Quakers did this voter survey just in the spring. Here's what the Arizona voters thought how we should be spending our money. Huge amount on K through 12 education, health care, social services. Here's attitudes on spending in prison. Too much money. 52% think we're spending too much money on prison. The people are way ahead of the legislature, right? We are way ahead of them. Here's the support for alternatives to prison. You can see all of them. Mental health courts, diversion programs, drug treatment, earned time credit, all have huge support among the people in Arizona. How would you reduce the state deficit? They took a separate, this is all Arizona, this is Maricopa County, because they thought Maricopa County would be more conservative. In fact, it really wasn't. The figures came out almost the same of how they should shift spending. Don't send nonviolent offenders to prison. Use community programming. Here's the question is, does time in prison reduce the likelihood of committing more crime. People know it doesn't. People know that it does not. So, what's the solution? It's people. Smart on crime is the Democratic buzzword these days. Right on crime is the Republican buzzword. Everybody's actually sort of moving away from mass incarceration in different ways and different speeds. This is what Arizona Justice Alliance is doing. How can you help? Is a sheet being passed around, the sign-up sheet?
Yes.
All right, be sure to sign it or give me your business card or whatever. We'll be sure to contact you. We do a newsletter. When the legislature starts, we'll be sending you notices to say, support this or not. Organized for me to speak at your group. She mentioned last Thursday was my first Republican speech, and now I have one coming up for the Rotary. So, you gotta go everywhere, right? Oh, and the Democratic Party just passed a resolution against for-profit prisons at their last meeting? Yep. And there's a divestment campaign. And here, call Brewer tomorrow to stop that CCA thing. I mentioned that. 500 maximum security beds. She's trying to build that in Buckeye, inside the existing prison. They've issued 2 of the 5 contracts that need to be issued. They've issued the contract to the designer, the architect, which I mentioned, and they've issued it to the general contractor. But 3 more contracts need to be issued before shovel hits dirt. So we are trying to stop it. We still can. We're trying to stop it before it actually happens, so we need to tell her that. There's a phone number in the website, and write letters to the editor. They really do read these letters, legislators. They really do know that this is a statement of the people and what they think. So it is important, and if 10 of you write, at least 1 letter will get published. And I'm done, and now it's up to you.
We have time for a few questions. Go ahead and repeat the questions if anybody has questions.
I will.
For Dianne, just raise your hand or stand up.
How much out-of-state inmate infiltration into Arizona is?
I do not have those figures, although there is some, but I don't have those figures. That's one of the things that Chad had in his bills, to find out how many out-of-state prisoners. We can't find out this information. They won't tell us. So that is what he had in one of his bills, was to find that information out. Now, what's his name? Chester Crandall. He has sent a request to Chuck Ryan almost 6 months ago now, asking him who is in our supermax cells, our maximum security cells. Because we know who's in there. It is not dangerous criminals, it's the LGBT community. We're also bringing a complaint against the prison on that basis. Because what happens, LGBT are more likely to get raped and assaulted in prisons, right? So when they ask for protection, they don't put the abuser in the supermax, they put the victim in. So that's their protective segregation, is putting the LGBT community in the supermax cells. So that's who's in there, not dangerous criminals. So Chester Crandall, who was a Republican, has asked for this information now for nearly 6 months, and he can't get it out of Chuck Ryan. But yet they want more supermax cells. See, we don't believe they need more supermax cells because they've already got plenty anyway, and they don't have the right people in them. All right, yeah.
You said that you can't, the private for-profit prisons are not required regarding transparency and information. So where are your stats coming from?
Different studies primarily, and what things we can get out of them sometimes. Or if we can get DOC to get that information, which is very rare. But, so that's where.
And if I could just put a plug in for the book that I saw last month too, The New Jim Crow.
Oh, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Absolutely, read that book. If you haven't read it, read that book. It is fantastic. Any other questions? No? Okay.